Blood on a tuxedo isn't something you can dry clean. But when the most feared man in New York walked into the grand ballroom, silence hit faster than a bullet. Nobody dared breathe. Not the politicians, not his billionaire son. Until a plus-size event planner stepped forward and uttered one impossible Italian word. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel smelled of white truffles, imported Dom Perignon, 2008, and raw, unfiltered fear. Clara Higgins stood by the velvet-draped service doors, an earpiece tucked discreetly beneath her dark, heavy curls. At 260 pounds, Clara was a woman who took up space in a world that constantly demanded women shrink themselves. In her meticulously tailored navy wrap dress that accentuated her wide hips and full bust, she was an immovable force. She had spent the last decade building a reputation as the most impenetrable high-end event manager in Manhattan. She didn't cater to the rich, she commanded them. And tonight she was commanding the $300 million charity gala for the Romano family. The Romanos were old money on paper, with a legitimate real estate empire that stretched from Chicago to Naples. But off paper, in the whispered conversations of district attorneys and rival syndicates, they were the undisputed kings of the East Coast underworld. Lorenzo Romano, the 32-year-old billionaire heir, stood near the center ice sculpture. He was ruthlessly handsome, wearing a bespoke Brioni tuxedo that looked molded to his broad shoulders. He was a man who communicated in silent nods and cold, terrifying stares. He was currently conversing with the mayor of New York, though it looked more like he was giving the politician a performance review. Lorenzo was intimidating, yes, but he was a known quantity. He was the polished corporate face of the family. The real danger was a ghost. Clara. The frantic voice of her assistant, Thomas, crackled in her earpiece. Front doors, we have a situation. It's him. Clara's stomach tightened, though her face remained an impassive mask. Who is him, Thomas? The father. Vincenzo. The air in the ballroom seemed to instantly freeze. Vincenzo Romano had not been seen in public since the assassination attempt that took his wife's life 14 years ago. Known on the streets as Il Mostro, the monster. Vincenzo was a man of the old world. He didn't do corporate mergers. He did blood debts. The massive brass-handled mahogany doors at the front of the ballroom swung open, and the music from the string quartet abruptly died. The cellist actually dropped his bow, the clatter echoing violently in the sudden suffocating silence. Vincenzo Romano walked in. He was in his late 60s, leaning heavily on a silver-headed cane, wearing a black, double-breasted suit. His eyes were like polished obsidian dead cold, and entirely devoid of mercy. Flanked by 4 massive men with noticeable bulges under their jackets, he moved with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator. Politicians backed away. Wall Street titans lowered their eyes to the plush carpet. Even Lorenzo stiffened, his jaw locking, as he quickly excused himself from the mayor and walked toward his father. "Papa," Lorenzo said, his deep voice carrying in the quiet room. "You didn't tell me you were coming. Do I need an invitation to my own family's foundation?" "Lorenzo." Vincenzo's voice was like grinding stones. His heavy Italian accent was thick, unpolished by the decades he'd spent in America. "Of course not," Lorenzo replied, though the tension radiating off him was palpable. Clara watched from the perimeter, her eyes scanning the room for operational failures. Her staff was frozen. A young waiter named David, a 20-year-old college kid working his 3rd shift, was paralyzed near Vincenzo's path, holding a silver tray loaded with crystal Baccarat champagne flutes. David was shaking. "Move, David." Clara willed him silently. "Just step back." But as Vincenzo walked past David's trembling hands, betrayed him. The silver tray tipped. 3 crystal flutes slid tipping off the edge and shattering into sparkling shrapnel directly over Vincenzo's polished leather shoes. A splash of vintage champagne hit the Don's trouser leg. Somebody in the crowd gasped. Lorenzo closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Vincenzo stopped. He didn't look down at his shoes. He slowly turned his head to look at the terrified kid. David was hyperventilating, his face drained of all color. I am so sorry, sir. I'll clean it. I'm sorry, David stammered, dropping to his knees, his bare hands frantically trying to sweep up the broken glass, cutting his palm in the process. Blood smeared against the crystal. Vincenzo raised his cane and placed the silver tip under David's chin, forcing the bleeding boy to look up. The Don's guard stepped forward, their hands slipping inside their jackets. "You ruin my suit," Vincenzo whispered softly, the sound carrying across the deathly silent ballroom. "You bleed on my floor. You show disrespect in front of my son." Vincenzo's thumb traced the heavy gold ring on his right hand. Everyone in that room knew what happened next. The boy would be dragged out the back. He would disappear. Lorenzo stepped forward, his tone careful. "Papa let my security handle him. He's just a clumsy kid." "Silence!" Vincenzo snapped, not looking away from David. The older man's eyes narrowed. "Pick him up," he ordered his guards. "Take him to the kitchens." The 2 massive guards grabbed David by the armpits, hauling the sobbing boy to his feet. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. She was a caterer. She was an event planner. She was paid to be invisible. But she was also a woman who had spent her entire life being bullied, overlooked, and pushed around by cruel men who thought power was the right to inflict pain. She looked at David, who was looking at her with sheer, unfiltered terror. She didn't think. She just moved. Clara stepped out from the shadows of the velvet drapes. The heavy fabric of her dress swished as she strode directly across the ballroom floor. She didn't tiptoe. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble walkways between the carpets. "Put him down," Clara said. Her voice wasn't a yell. It was a firm, resonant command. The entire room seemed to experience a collective heart attack. Lorenzo whipped his head around his dark eyes, widening in disbelief as he took in the sight of the plus-size woman marching directly into the crosshairs of the Mafia's most violent patriarch. Vincenzo slowly turned. He looked Clara up and down, his gaze lingering with blatant disgust on her heavy frame, her full cheeks, her thick arms. To a man who dealt exclusively in beautiful, silent, thin women, Clara was an anomaly, an offensive one. "And who?" Vincenzo hissed. "Are you, fatty?" Clara felt the sting of the insult, but she had heard it 1,000,000 times before. She didn't flinch. She stopped 5 feet from the Don, staring directly into his obsidian eyes. "I am the woman running this event," Clara said, her voice steady. "And he is my employee. He made a mistake. You will let him go, and I will personally pay for the dry cleaning of your suit." Vincenzo stared at her. Then a low, rasping chuckle vibrated in his chest. "You think you can pay for this, cow, like you giving me orders?" He turned to his men. "Take the boy, and if she speaks again, break her jaw." The guards yanked David backward. Clara felt a sudden, blinding flash of pure ancestral fury. It was a memory, a word her Sicilian grandmother used to spit at men who abused their power, a word that stripped a man of his pride and exposed the rot in his soul. It was a word of ultimate disrespect in the old country. "Vigliacco," Clara said. The word cut through the ballroom like a guillotine blade. "Coward." The silence that followed was absolute. Vincenzo Romano froze. The silver cane in his hand trembled slightly. The word vigliacco was not just an insult. To a Cosa Nostra boss, it was a challenge to his honor, his legacy, and his very right to breathe. No one had called him a coward to his face, and lived to see the next sunrise. Lorenzo stepped between his father and Clara, his massive frame shielding her from the Don's immediate line of sight. "Papa!" Lorenzo warned, his voice dangerously low, his hand hovering over his own concealed weapon. Lorenzo was loyal to the family, but a public execution of an innocent civilian at a high society charity gala would bring down the FBI, the IRS, and the mayor's office in one swift blow. But Vincenzo ignored his son. He shoved past Lorenzo with shocking strength, stopping mere inches from Clara. Clara had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. She could smell the cigars and the distinct metallic scent of old blood on him. Her heart was beating so fast she thought she might pass out, but her thick legs remained firmly planted. She didn't shrink. She didn't cower. "What did you call me?" Vincenzo whispered. "I called you a vigliacco." Clara repeated her voice, betraying not a single tremor. "A strong man protects his people. A strong man builds empires. Only a coward tortures a 20-year-old boy for dropping a glass of champagne. Only a vigliacco uses his power to bully those who cannot fight back. So go ahead. Break my jaw. Kill us both. But know that everyone in this room will know exactly what you are." For 10 agonizing seconds, the Don stared into Clara's fierce, unblinking eyes. He searched her face for fear for the inevitable crumble of a civilian playing a game they didn't understand. But all he saw was a woman who was entirely unapologetic for taking up the space she stood in. Slowly, incredibly, Vincenzo lowered his cane. He looked at David, who was still dangling from the grips of the bodyguards. "Let the boy go," Vincenzo ordered quietly. The guards dropped David, who scrambled backward on the floor, weeping silently. Vincenzo turned his dark eyes back to Clara. A strange, twisted smirk pulled at the corner of his scarred mouth. "You have a big mouth. Too big." "It matches the rest of me," Clara replied flatly. Vincenzo barked a sudden, genuine laugh. It shocked the room even more than the insult had. He tapped his cane twice against the floor, turned his back on her, and looked at his son. "Lorenzo, the gala is boring. I'm going back to the estate." "I'll walk you out," Lorenzo said, his voice tight. As Vincenzo walked past Clara, he paused, leaning in, so close his rough cheek brushed her ear. "You are lucky you have fire in your blood, girl," he murmured. "My wife used to look at me just like that." Vincenzo left the ballroom, his guards trailing behind him. The heavy doors clicked shut. Suddenly, the room erupted into whispers. The string quartet frantically began playing Vivaldi. Thomas ran over to David, dragging the boy away toward the kitchens to patch him up. Clara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for an eternity. Her knees suddenly felt like water. She turned to head toward the sanctuary of the catering prep room, desperate to hide the sudden shaking in her hands. Before she could take 3 steps, a heavy hand wrapped around her thick upper arm. Clara gasped, spinning around. Lorenzo Romano loomed over her. Up close, the billionaire was devastating. He had high aristocratic cheekbones, midnight dark hair, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. But it was the raw, unrestrained intensity radiating from him that pinned Clara to the spot. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Lorenzo asked, his grip on her arm, firm but surprisingly gentle. "I saved my employee's life," Clara said, trying to pull her arm away. His fingers didn't budge. "You insulted the Don of the Romano family in front of 200 people, Lorenzo corrected her, his voice a low, gravelly hum. Men have been buried in concrete for clearing their throats while he was speaking. You called him a coward." "He was acting like one." Lorenzo stared at her. His gaze dropped from her defiant eyes, lingering on the soft curve of her jaw, the heavy slope of her breasts, beneath the silk wrap dress, and the thick, sturdy curve of her hips. It wasn't the look of a man disgusted by her size. It was the look of a man trying to decipher a complex, dangerous puzzle. In Lorenzo's world, women were currency. They were thin, fragile, heavily manicured trophies, meant to look beautiful and remain silent. This woman was loud, large, and completely fearless. "What is your name?" Lorenzo asked softly. "Clara Higgins." "Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Romano, I have a $300,000 dinner service to salvage." She yanked her arm again. This time Lorenzo let her go. He watched her walk away, his eyes tracking the confident, heavy sway of her hips as she disappeared through the service doors. 48 hours later, Clara was exhausted. The gala had been a massive success, but the adrenaline crash had left her feeling like she'd been hit by a freight train. She was sitting in her small, cluttered office in the back of her catering warehouse in Brooklyn, rubbing her temples and staring at an invoice for Wagyu beef when the front door of the warehouse opened with a loud chime. "We're closed!" Clara yelled from her desk. Heavy footsteps echoed against the concrete floor. Clara frowned, pushing her chair back. She walked out of her office into the main industrial kitchen area. Standing amidst the stainless steel prep tables was Lorenzo Romano. He was out of his tuxedo today, wearing a custom black button-down shirt that hugged his muscular torso, the sleeves rolled up to reveal expensive ink snaking up his left forearm. He looked out of place in her flour-dusted warehouse, yet he commanded the space entirely. Clara crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly hyper-aware of her appearance. She was wearing loose black leggings and a baggy, oversized t-shirt, her hair thrown into a messy bun. She felt enormous, messy, and entirely vulnerable. "Mr. Romano," Clara said, keeping her voice guarded, "to what do I owe the pleasure did I overcharge you for the beluga caviar?" Lorenzo didn't smile. He walked slowly toward her, his expensive leather shoes silent on the concrete. He stopped just a foot away, invading her personal space. The scent of bergamot and expensive leather washed over her. "My father is a very paranoid man, Miss Higgins," Lorenzo said smoothly, his eyes locking onto hers. When a woman he has never met speaks to him in Sicilian dialect, using a word his late wife used to call him, he gets curious. Clara swallowed hard. "It's a common word." "Not the way you said it." Lorenzo reached into his jacket pocket. Clara flinched, a spike of pure terror shooting through her, but he only pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He held it out to her. "What is this?" she asked, not taking it. "A contract," Lorenzo said. "My father is hosting a private weekend retreat at our family estate in the Hamptons. He wants you to cater it. He wants you to plan the entire thing." Clara stared at the envelope, as if it were a venomous snake. "I don't work private residential events, especially not for people who threaten to execute my staff." "You do now," Lorenzo said softly. Clara's eyes flared with anger. "Are you threatening me, Lorenzo?" He stepped closer, his chest almost brushing hers. The heat coming off him was intoxicating. He looked down at her, his gaze dropping to her full, pouty lips before returning to her eyes. "I am protecting you, Clara. You made a spectacle of him. There are captains in my family who think you should be made an example of for disrespecting the Don. My father wants to observe you. He wants to know who you are and who sent you. If you refuse this job, you confirm their suspicions that you are an operative or an enemy. If you refuse," Lorenzo's voice dropped to a dark whisper, "I won't be able to stop what they do to you." Clara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She had played a dangerous hand in that ballroom, and now the house was calling her bluff. She looked at Lorenzo. "And what do you want?" Lorenzo's eyes darkened, a dangerous possessive hunger flashing in the stormy depths. He reached up his large, calloused thumb, gently tracing the soft, full curve of her jawline. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of fire straight to her core. "I want to see if you are as brave behind closed doors," Lorenzo whispered, "as you are in a crowded room." The Romano family estate in the Hamptons wasn't a beach house. It was a fortress masquerading as architectural art. Set on 40 acres of private coastline, the sprawling limestone mansion was surrounded by 12-foot wrought-iron gates and patrolled by men whose tailored suits couldn't hide their tactical holsters. Clara stood in the center of the cavernous industrial-grade kitchen, her thick thighs planted firmly on the pristine tile. She was dressed in her standard black chef's coat, custom-fitted to accommodate her broad shoulders and heavy bust. She tasted the rich, simmering San Marzano tomato sauce with a wooden spoon, closing her eyes as the garlic and basil hit her palate. "Needs more salt," she murmured to Thomas, who was frantically ticking off inventory on his clipboard. "You cook like a woman who actually enjoys eating," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Clara's eyes snapped open. Lorenzo Romano was leaning against the steel doorframe, watching her. He was dressed casually, in a dark cashmere sweater and dark jeans, but the relaxed clothing only emphasized the coiled, dangerous power in his frame. He walked toward her, his gaze sweeping over her thick curves with an open, unapologetic hunger that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. In a world where wealthy men paraded skeletal, heavily modified socialites on their arms, Lorenzo looked at Clara like she was a lavish feast. "I am a chef and an event planner. Lorenzo," Clara said, turning her back to him to stir the sauce. "I don't trust a skinny cook, and I certainly don't starve myself for society's comfort." Lorenzo stepped up right behind her. The heat of his broad chest radiated against her back. "I loathe skinny women," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "They feel like fragile glass. You, Clara, you feel like a woman who could survive a war." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't step away. "Is there a war coming tonight?" Lorenzo's tone shifted, the seduction instantly replaced by cold, hard reality. "My father invited the heads of the 5 remaining New York families. It is supposed to be a peace summit. But peace in our world is just a pause to reload. Keep your eyes open, Clara. Do not leave the kitchen." He squeezed her waist, a firm, possessive grip that sent a shockwave of heat straight to her core, and walked out. Dinner service began 2 hours later. The tension in the dining room seeped through the swinging kitchen doors like a toxic gas. Clara ran the line with military precision. Osso buco, saffron risotto, and imported burrata flowed out to the massive mahogany table. But as the final course approached, Clara noticed something wrong. It was a small detail. A temporary waiter Clara had vetted through a premium Manhattan agency was preparing the espresso tray for Vincenzo and the other bosses. But instead of pouring the espresso from the copper machine, the waiter had his back turned, his shoulders hunched. Clara remembered the stories her grandfather used to whisper, real bloody history. He used to talk about the hit on real-life Mafia boss Paul Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse in 1985, how the assassins wore trench coats and waited in the shadows. The Mafia didn't always use guns. Sometimes they used the staff. Clara moved with a sudden silent agility that surprised people who underestimated her size. She stepped behind the waiter just as he slipped a tiny clear vial back into his vest pocket. "What did you just put in the Don's cup?" Clara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The waiter spun around, his eyes wide with panic. He was young, but his hands were steady as he reached toward his waistband. He wasn't reaching for a napkin. Clara didn't scream. She didn't call for the guards. She grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, a solid 12-pound cast-iron skillet, resting on the prep table, and swung it with every ounce of strength in her heavy, powerful arms. Clang! The skillet connected squarely with the side of the assassin's head. The man crumpled to the floor like a puppet, with its strings cut a silenced pistol sliding out of his waistband and skittering across the tiles. The kitchen erupted into chaos. Thomas shrieked. 2 prep cooks dove under the tables. The swinging doors burst open. Lorenzo and 3 heavily armed bodyguards stormed into the kitchen, weapons drawn. Vincenzo walked in slowly behind them, his silver cane tapping ominously against the floor. Lorenzo's stormy eyes locked onto Clara, who was standing over the unconscious assassin, her chest heaving, the cast-iron skillet still gripped tightly in her hand. She pointed at the espresso tray. "He poisoned the dark roast," Clara panted. "The one with the lemon peel, your father's cup." The silence in the kitchen mirrored the deathly quiet of the ballroom 2 nights prior, but this time the air was thick with gunpowder and adrenaline. Lorenzo holstered his weapon and crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He didn't look at the assassin on the floor. He looked at Clara. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his eyes frantically scanning her body. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I'm fine." Clara breathed, her adrenaline beginning to crash, leaving her hands shaking. "I'm fine, Lorenzo. He was fast, but I carry more weight behind my swing." Vincenzo Romano stepped over the unconscious hitman. He looked at the spilled espresso, then at the silenced pistol on the floor, and finally at the plus-size caterer holding the cast-iron pan. For the second time since Clara had met, the terrifying Don Vincenzo smiled. It was a dark, terrifying, entirely genuine smile. "They sent a rat to kill a lion." Vincenzo rasped, his thick Italian accent cutting through the tension. "But they forgot to account for the lioness in the kitchen." Vincenzo looked at his son, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of a saved life. In the old world of the Cosa Nostra, it was a blessing. The Don tapped his cane against the tile, signaling his men. "Clean up this garbage," he ordered, pointing to the assassin. "And find out who holds his leash." As the guards dragged the man out the back door, Vincenzo turned to leave. He paused at the swinging doors and looked back at Clara. "The braciole was excellent, Miss Higgins. Next time, less salt in the sauce." With that, the Don vanished back into the dining room. The kitchen was empty now, save for Lorenzo and Clara. The billionaire heir stepped closer to her, gently prying the heavy skillet from her trembling fingers and setting it on the counter. "You saved his life," Lorenzo said, his voice a raw, emotional rasp. "You saved my family. I was just protecting my kitchen." Clara deflected, though tears of delayed shock were prickling the corners of her eyes. "Nobody messes with my espresso service." Lorenzo didn't laugh. He reached out his large hands, cupping her soft, full cheeks. He wiped away a stray tear with his thumb. "Stop hiding behind the catering, Clara. You are the bravest, most infuriatingly stubborn woman I have ever met. You don't shrink for anyone. You don't apologize for who you are." "I don't belong in your world, Lorenzo," she whispered, looking up into his stormy eyes. "I am an event planner from Brooklyn. I am soft and I am heavy, and I don't know how to navigate men with guns." "You belong wherever I am," Lorenzo fiercely declared. His gaze dropped to her lips. "And I don't want a fragile woman. I want you. Every thick, beautiful, fierce inch of you. I want the woman who calls the devil a coward to his face and hits assassins with frying pans." He didn't give her a chance to argue. Lorenzo pulled her heavy curves, flush against his hard, muscular frame and crushed his mouth to hers. The kiss was like a match striking dynamite. It was bruising, desperate, and intoxicating. Clara gasped against his lips, her hands instinctively coming up to grip his broad shoulders as he backed her up against the stainless steel prep table. Lorenzo's hands roamed over her body, memorizing the dip of her waist and the swell of her wide hips, treating her body not as something to be hidden, but as something to be worshipped. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing heavily, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "You're not going back to Brooklyn," Lorenzo murmured, his voice laced with unyielding authority and deep, resonant affection. "You're going to stay right here, with me." Clara looked at the billionaire Mafia heir, a man who commanded cities, but was currently looking at her like she was the only ruler he recognized. A slow, confident smile spread across her lips. "Fine," Clara said, her eyes flashing with that signature defiance. "But I'm redesigning this kitchen." Did Clara's fearless defiance leave you speechless? If you love thrilling mafia romances, where strong, thick women take charge and bring billionaire bosses to their knees, hit that like button, share this story with your friends who crave dark, passionate drama and unexpected twists. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another heart-pounding episode. Drop a comment below. What would you have said to the Don?